They tell you that this is one of the darkest days in American history. But what about this?
Grenades and pepper spray.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly. It is not unruly. It is not unruly.
Rioters set the city's 3rd precinct police station on fire.
Antifa's getting revenge.
This is the Cop City site.
Tonight, thousands of protesters remain in downtown D.C.
And what they did supersedes January 6th in death, 25-30 to 1.
Yes.
Damage to the city, it's not 20 to 1. It's 1,000,000 to 1.
Yeah.
Because the insurrection wasn't any damage to the local businesses or anything.
Nothing.
The damage in BLM protests, riots in the streets, fires, local businesses getting hit, it's not 1,000 to 1. It's more like 1,000,000,000 to 1.
Back up to this right here. Yeah.
And yet, all we keep hearing is about January 6th.
Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You saw the assault on the Capitol on January 6th.
That made me sick.
An angry riot that stormed the Capitol on Election Day, which, according to the news, was provoked by the 45th President of the United States.
Roughly 950 people have been charged with crimes related to the January 6th attack. Of those, 284 were charged with assaulting or resisting an officer. 295 were charged with obstruction of an official proceeding before Congress.
The news seems to have forgotten about this.
We are going to fight back.
The president's view is that there's a lot of passion.
Keep protesting, because keep making your point.
They don't.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
We got to be ready to throw a punch. We have to be ready to throw a punch.
This is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after.
Destroying property which can be replaced is not violence.
I'm proud of New York, and I'm proud of the protests.
They're not going to let up, and they should not.
You remember the Portland riots? Remember? It was 100 days of violence. Fires were set, businesses were destroyed.
We are beginning to suspect that the violence expected in Memphis tonight is not organic. It's not just outraged people taking to the streets. Why are we guessing that? Because similar violence is also expected tonight in cities across the country. As we speak, Antifa is coordinating riots on both coasts and in between. That would include Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, California, as well as Atlanta, Georgia, New York City, suburban Washington, D.C., etc., etc. Our rage is stronger than their power.
The point was made clearly by Tucker. Hey, look at this Antifa, manifestation in Georgia. He said, how come we had a whole year of riots? And he shows all the footage, 200 cities with Antifa. Then the moment the Democrats had their guy in office, they stopped rioting. He said, clearly, the riots were intended to create the impression something's wrong in America with Donald Trump. The Antifa is working for the Democrat Party. Let's really go to the point that these guys here, and he mentions 5 or 6 of them, who have multiple records on, that they're out within 24 hours. Compare that to people that were not violent, but who were guilty of walking into the Capitol, who have still been locked up and denied freedom in 2 years for the crime of just being there, when you've got these thugs working for the Democrats burning down cities.
All right, so you were just sentenced to a custodial house arrest, $103,000 worth of fines. Can you tell all of our viewers, what did you do on January 6th? Who did you assault? What did you steal? What did you break?
I went through a door that opened in front of me, and I walked through the Capitol. I carried God's presence into that building for about 10 minutes, walked out, did not shout, stayed within the lines, and was not stopped by any police officers.
Proud Boy sentenced to 17 years in prison for his actions on January 6th.
You used the phrase inside job to describe what happened on January 6th.
If you had told me, it's close to 3 years ago that January 6, 2021 happened. If you had told me 3 years ago, back when I was a biotech CEO, not steeped in this world, I was just consuming passive media but was focused on my world of developing medicines. If you had told me that January 6 was in any way an inside job, the subject of government entrapment, I would have told you that was crazy talk. The reality is we know that there were federal law enforcement agents in that field. We don't know how many. I think it's shameful. If I may finish just answering.
Well, let me
this is really important.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here because
I know this establishment doesn't approve of this message. I know
there is no evidence that there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
So why, before Congress, when pressed on what the number was, they didn't say there were none. They just couldn't say how many there were.
So you're saying,
and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that.
Where is the evidence that the government was involved in planning or executing January 6th?
So I'm going to give you hard facts, and if I may add, I know this is going to be a little uncomfortable. Why did they suppress footage of now what's been released, 200 hours of footage of shooting rubber bullets into that crowd, shooting tear gas into that crowd? You didn't see that before. You saw what the response was to that. Now you see footage coming out of actually rolling out the red carpet for Capitol Police allowing people in.
Again,
right through the front door. The government cannot put you up to do something and then charge you for it. That's wrong.
I don't want to have
to the left or the right. I don't want to have
to.
On top of that, during the 2020 riots, bricks were found on the street of most major cities. Who put them there?
Some random ass bricks, bro. Ain't no construction. Ain't no construction, bro. Just some random ass bricks sitting here.
This the setup. They put them there on purpose, bro.
Over the course of the 2020 Minneapolis riots, hundreds of buildings were burned, vandalized, or looted. It amounted to $500 million in damage. Why did it take 3 days after George Floyd was killed for the state of Minnesota to send the National Guard into the city to quell the violence and destruction? It's a question that the people of Minneapolis have asked for years, and now it has become a national question.
George Soros. According to this news report from MidMichiganNow.com, George Soros' political organization gave $35 million to anti-police activists.
He paid for it. I mean, why can't we discuss the fact that millions of dollars he spent?
I agree with Melissa. George Soros doesn't need to be a part of this conversation.
I mean, Soros actually, he is, I believe, the top contributor to the Democratic Party.
You ever heard Soros' interview with 60 Minutes where he says, I see myself as a god?
Okay, so George Soros is this foreign-born left-wing guy who essentially wants to change the nature of our country.
Did you use that $916 million loss to avoid paying personal federal income taxes?
Of course I do. Of course I do. And so do all of her donors, or most of her donors. I know many of her donors. I absolutely used it, and so did Warren Buffett, and so did George Soros.
I think we're almost 24 hours away from the inauguration of the 45th president of the United States.
Well, I have described him as an imposter and con man and a would-be dictator.
Who are some of the biggest donors you have, and is there a restriction on how much money they can give?
We don't have any restriction, but I would say our biggest donors are the Open Society Institute is a very big donor.
And whose organization is that?
It's well known to be George Soros is the one who funds it.
In this data dump, one of the memos was about the refugee crisis. They think that they've been successful at influencing immigration policy across the world. They think that the refugee crisis is an opportunity to continue doing so. And they think the refugee crisis is the new normal. George Soros is this guy who is a staunch advocate for open borders.
I mean, who elected Soros to dictate public policy and laws? Why does he feel entitled to impose his agenda?
In my opinion, he fundamentally hates humanity. I mean, well, he's doing things that erode the fabric of civilization.
It seems that Soros believes he was anointed by God. I fancied myself as some kind of a god. Ask anybody who's from Hungary. Bring up the name Soros, see what they say about him.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above.
I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
As president, it will be my personal mission to restore the scales of justice in America. We want fairness and equality under the law, and to that end, I will appoint U.S. attorneys who will be the polar opposite of the Soros district attorneys and others that are being appointed throughout the United States. Very unfair to our population, very unfair to our country. They will be the 100 most ferocious legal warriors against crime and communist corruption that this country has ever seen.
The question is which one was worse. Vote wisely.